two enigmatic stories. In the way of alchemy, let's see what happens when their chemistry mixes in us. The first is that story about the pious man, true and faithful to the faith of his day, but born into a life of abject poverty. Penurious, there was not a day in his life that his stomach did not grumble with hunger. And every day after he fulfilled the rituals of his faith, he would pray to God, "Oh God, please alleviate my suffering. At least bring me the basic needs of life." Day after day he prayed in this way. But then one night he began to have a dream, and in his dream the only thing that came was the word "come." Night after night he would dream the word "come." And so instead of begging God for the basics of life, he began to beg to understand what it meant, the word "come." And then one night, in his dream, it spoke to him and very clearly gave him instructions. Go to the bookstore, and there on a shelf you will find a scroll. Take it. And in his dream he questioned, "You mean steal it?" And the voice said, "It belongs to you. Bring it home and study it well. It will show you where to find a treasure." So the next day, true to his dream, he went to the bookstore, and sure enough, as he was looking around under a pile of papers, he saw a scroll. When the owner of the bookstore was not looking, he slipped the scroll out from under the papers and put it in his robe. And he took it home, and there he studied it. It was a map of his village, clearly showing the town square. And in the calligraphic writing underneath, there were instructions. Take a bow and arrow, stand in the town square facing east, and let the arrow go. Where the arrow lands, dig, and you will find a treasure. Now the man did not own a bow and arrow, nor did he know how to shoot an arrow from a bow. But following the instructions, he borrowed a bow and arrow and a shovel, and he went to the town square. and facing east, he put the arrow in the bow and let it fly. Where it landed, he began to dig, but there was nothing there. Day after day he went and let the arrow fly and dug, and soon people began to see him digging and asked him what he was doing. Now he was afraid to tell them, because he knew that if it came to the ears of the king, then the king would want the scroll, the map. But sure enough it happened, and he was called into the presence of the king. What could he do? He had to tell his story and relinquish the scroll. So immediately the king had his soldiers come to dig, following the instructions. They dug all around the square and found no treasure. Finally, the king, very disgruntled, sent for the man and gave him back the scroll. This is rubbish. If you indeed find treasure, it is yours. I want no more to do with it. Now the man, taking back the scroll, realized that he did not know the way of bows and arrows. So he began to practice the art of archery until he became quite adept. And again he went out to the town square, and placing the arrow in the bow with one-pointedness and accuracy, he let the arrow fly. But again he had no success where he dug. In a state of despair, he went home, still living in poverty, every day hearing the grumbling of his stomach. But then, falling asleep one night, again the words came to him. Foolish man, you were not instructed to shoot the arrow. You were instructed to let the arrow go. So, following these instructions, the man went to the town square, placing his arrow in his bow. He let the arrow go. It dropped right at his feet. And there he dug and found the treasure that he'd been seeking. The second story is again about a man and his family, born to poverty. All they owned was a small field in which they grew potatoes. So potatoes is what they lived on. Potatoes for breakfast, potatoes for lunch, potatoes for dinner. No luxuries came into their life, their only sustenance being potatoes. The man grew disgruntled even though he longed for better things for himself and his family. But somehow his longing brought into his possession a book. And in this book it told of an island that contained diamonds, and it even gave instructions about how to find the way to this island. So the man determined that he would find this place to enrich his life and his family. So, taking some empty potato sacks, he borrowed a boat and he set to row himself to find the island of diamonds. It was a very arduous journey. There were storms and tempests, so many times he thought that he was going to be lost under the roaring ocean. But one day, looking out into the distance, he saw something glistening, gleaming, shining. Ah, the island of diamonds. Landing in his small boat, the sand was covered in these glittering stones. So with great haste he began to fill his sacks with this rich treasure. But as he was doing so, the inhabitants of that island came down to see what he was doing. And he told them joyously, I'm rich, I'm going to live in luxury with my family. And the people of that island said, oh, you foolish man, this island is strewn with these pebbles. There's something much more valuable than this. What is it? What is it? The man said. And the people said, well, once there was a man here and he went into the inland of our island and he brought back potatoes. The richness of potatoes. And the man said, well, there's no one who knows potatoes better than I do. So he set out for the inland. After emptying the diamonds he'd put in his sacks, he went off inland and found potatoes. He filled up the sacks with potatoes and brought them back to the people, and they made him king. They put him on their shoulders and took him into town, feted him. So for a whole year he was their monarch. But then he thought of his family. They were waiting for him. So he told the people that he had to leave and return from whence he came. So he filled his sacks with potatoes, climbed into his little boat, and made the arduous journey back to his family. They greeted him with great joy. We thought you'd got lost at sea. Did you find the treasure? Yes, 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 he said, and he emptied his sacks to reveal potatoes. And his wife and family said, potatoes. We have nothing else but potatoes. What do you mean by bringing us potatoes? And he suddenly realized what he'd done. His poor wife, with tears in her eyes, took the potatoes and cooked up their evening meal, the evening meal that they'd had for so long. But then it so happened that their children, who happened to be playing with the empty sacks that he'd taken to the island, discovered that there were a few little pieces of diamond that were not emptied out when he emptied the sacks on the island. So it seems that although they never became rich and had many luxuries of life, these few pieces of diamond allowed them to have things in their life other than potatoes. Alchemy. The alchemy of stories. Knowing now, as we sit here, that we no longer take these stories into our mind and attempt to understand them with the machinations of mind. We allow their chemistry, like the food, the fluids we put into our mouth, to flow down and be ingested to extract the nutrients and qualities, essences. What do these stories bring for us? Knowing that now, like food and drink, they go into a place where they become one with us. And come forth in a form that's our own. What do these stories bring up for you? Or maybe it's like what Divine Mother used to say. She would sometimes say, I've put all the tapes inside of you. They will come out when they're needed. What does it mean? But sometimes when we eat and drink, we have to burp before the food and drinks get digested. What about a burp or two from you? What burp comes up from your stories in your immediacy?
It's the first one. It's looking for the treasure, and it's right there.
Yes.
And whatever needs to, things that go in, it's always there. It comes out at the right time, at the right place.
Yes.
And it's, I think with the diamonds, it feels like we have what we have. We go out and explore other things and come back to ourselves, and the little bits of diamond that we learn along the way from other experiences join our essence of who we actually are, without having to change and go and live in the land of diamonds because we live in the land of potatoes. But we can still have peace in it.
The same as feeling, isn't it? Potatoes. What do the potatoes signify in this story? He owns this field, belongs to him. All he knows is how to dig potatoes. It's really saying the same thing, isn't it? We have what we need ourselves.
We also need to do the journey to know that we know that.
Exactly. We need to make the journey to know that. Just like he had to follow instructions in the first story, in the second story he also had to follow instructions, didn't he? Same with us too, isn't it? Same with us too. But as in the first story, had he listened and said, it didn't say, shoot the arrow, it said, let the arrow go. What is this telling us also?
The harder we look at, the further we look at it, it's not there.
That's right. If we have a projection of what is being said or whatever, isn't it? See? That's more. Maybe a little digestive process is needed. But feel free to go.
I think also with the potatoes, it's recognizing your own value.
And recognizing
Even
your own
though
value.
they thought they were poor, they had a
They're rich.
richness
They had a richness.
about them.
Breakfast, lunch and dinner. Yes. Sameness. And when it comes down to us, we have the same. We have the sameness. How many people come along and say, oh, I don't want to live the spiritual life because it's living a flat line. It's boring. It's like eating potatoes. Breakfast, lunch and dinner, isn't it?
It's talking
Add a
to
pinch of salt and a bit of chili.
Yeah.
It tastes completely different. Potato's not quite potato anymore, is it?
It's not. We've got the potato and the life brings the spice, doesn't it?
You
But
might
the
eat the
potato
same
is the
sugar today.
permanency that we have. Yes, you bet. So look at the stories deeply and
beautiful
find their
story.
big meaning.
Really